Today we're going to talk about sort of how the world works. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to call this. I think I could call it the Bilderberg group. I think I could call it voter fraud. So I don't know the title of this one just yet. So if you do, then you know more than me at this point. Sometimes I get the opportunity to remind people of things at the exact moment that they can understand what I'm about to say. And one of my favorite sayings, whether it be through a Facebook chat or just a conversation with someone, is the richest people in the world do not allow peasants to determine their future. And I say it exactly that way because that's how they view us. And what's funny about it is I've met some people who are, extremely wealthy people who are in the dark, right? They believe all the official stories. And every once in a while, I'll get a chance to throw out that line to a billionaire. And last time I did it, wasn't quite a billionaire, but it was someone who's literally been around the planet and seen the finest that life can offer most people, besides goathead birthday parties. But I said that, and she goes, "That's for sure." And it's because once you travel in these circles and you listen to the people discuss things and you listen to their attitude towards life and, where they take risks and where they don't take risks, there's no way in hell they're going to let Joe the plumber decide whether or not they can start a war, whether or not they can make an investment, whether or not they get a tax break, whether or not they can molest a child. The people at the tippy top do what Bill Cosby does, which is you can have any woman in the world, but that's not satisfying. You have to take it from someone who doesn't want to give it to you. You have to be the rapist of society. We're about to lead into an election. It's 2016, right? So there's this election coming up here in America. And of course, it's already turned into an absolute joke. And it used to be that when everybody was, when the baby boomers were essentially at the tip of the spear of consciousness, the ruling class could essentially do whatever they wanted to because they had an entire population of indoctrinated, entitled people. That were looking for handouts, looking for cheap leasing agreements on cars they can't afford. Everyone was in the 70s was, convinced that men beat up their wives constantly so they could create a two-income household. So children were pushed into the system as soon as possible, right? But today it's a lot harder, and yet they're still trying to play their old tricks. Look at America's election right now, right? It's a joke. What do we have as a choice in the consciousness of people in the United States of America? Hillary Clinton, socialistic Barry Sanders, and on the Republican ticket you have Cruz, who no one really understands who the hell that fucking guy is. I even forget the other guy. And then you have Donald Trump. There's only one person in the entire group of four, which it's a 350 million person country. 350 million. And we have four choices. Three of which, in fact, only one of which, let's just put it that way, only one of which is a true person with their own accomplishments in life, like it used to be back in the Teddy Roosevelt days, who actually amassed wealth through struggle. And the rest of them are all career politicians who've never had a real job in their life. Maybe they were professors in colleges. There's nothing wrong with being a professor. I'm just saying, if you work inside an educational institution and you never touch the private sector, your grasp on reality, sorry to say, is negligible. You have nothing but theoretical knowledge. You have knowledge and you don't have wisdom. And I think that it's a sad thing in the world that a person can be a professor without having to actually be successful at it, or at least try to be successful at it. Because what if someone's full of shit, right? What if they're full of shit about what they're regurgitating because they've never been in the industry before? And they go in to teach kids. When I had to learn computers in the 80s, it was a joke. Even in the early 90s, I was in De Anza College, the place that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, I believe, both went to before they went off to their 4-year. At least Steve Jobs went there. think it was 1993, and I started taking college courses at night just to kind of see what I could put on paper. And I'm working on a VAX mainframe in 1993. Unbelievably, regress systems. So there's the educational system. It's a little bit better today, but they're always like 10 years behind. Always. But this isn't about the bunk educational system in this country. This is about, how do you vote? How's the voting process work in the world? Well, I'm only going to be able to come at it from the United States of America perspective. What's funny is when you ask an American how money's made, you get this deer-eyed look on their face because they're like, I don't know, but I should know. You should know how your money's made. And you just start to think of these gigantic banks in New York City. Well, somewhere in there it's made. But in terms of, they'll say, well, I've been to the mint, one of the United States mints, and I've seen money printed. But in terms of how it financially binds to the country itself, they have no idea. I have a family member that teaches economics, and when I asked her, she has a master's in business administration, and she used to teach economics in college, and I said, well, how is money made? How do you teach your students about how money's made? I know how it's made. You tell me. Of course, I didn't tell her I knew, but she goes all the way up to a point, and she said, well, then I tell my students that magic happens. And I was like, that's funny, but what do you really say? She says, no, that's what I tell them. I'm going to tell you that if I asked any one of the people in the United States of America, how is your vote counted? You have no clue. And quite frankly, there's a bunch of pieces missing in my own mind after studying it, after reading about it. Here's the thing about voting. There is, we can approach this from several different angles. Probably the most useless way to do it is to go from when you walk in the voting booth and cast your vote and then try to track it to where it gets actually counted. Because by the time you walk into a voting booth, your choices are gone. So we're going to start from the very tippy top of who runs this planet and trace back to you walking in the voting booth. Because it will become profoundly evident as we come back towards the voting booth machine that you getting up in the morning to vote is a completely pointless gesture. However, it shouldn't be. And if there's one thing we're going to have to fight for in this world, is to make that matter again. God, if I said I can't wait till summer, well, there, I just said it. It's going to rain for a week here, so I won't be able to record any shows for a week. So I thought I'd throw another one in there. I think I'm like 8 in the queue at this point. Okay. I think we all can come to the realization, whether or not you believe there's an infrastructure to run the world at the very tippy top, that there are people out there that are so incredibly wealthy that they're not listed on the Forbes 500 or the Forbes 1000, right? I think there's a lot of you that understand that regardless of how wealthy you think Bill Gates ever got on paper, which I think topped out around $65 billion, he was far from the richest person on planet Earth. For those of you who understand that there's sultans out there that own the oil companies, right? The Sultan of Brunei, who owns Shell Oil Company, Motor Company. A buddy of mine worked for him for a year and a half, so I got a major insight into how that operation works. Like he's dead now, and his 3 sons have now divvied up the company. I don't know, the oldest one takes over, sort of thing. But that's a Middle Eastern family line. But there are folks in Europe who put those guys to shame. The sheiks and the Arabs, they're really late to this wealth game. Yes, they have an amazing amount of resources, but at all times there have been white Anglo-Saxon / Kharazan Jews, no Jewish blood in their bones, who have been controlling how much wealth they have access to. So I guarantee you they've never gotten out of control in terms of their wealth accumulation. They're completely under the thumb of these other individuals. But now let's just take the anatomy, because a lot of people struggle with this whole thing of there's not a cabal of families around the world. That's bullshit. I've had very, very brilliant people argue with me about this because they grew up with the sons and daughters of people and from these massive families They're like, well, I grew up in those next door to those families, and I never saw any type of cabal. And it's like, hey, maybe children aren't invited to run the world. Do you ever think about that? They don't think about the fact that they knew these people when they were in their 20s and even their teens. It's like, yeah, maybe they don't get to run the world in those age brackets, and maybe they need to demonstrate they have their head firmly pulled out of their ass to even get an opportunity to audition. Why would you think that, and some of these families are actually teeny tiny compared to the big families, right? If you're a household name because you're related to, a product line, you're not one of those families, right? These families are not well known. But now you wake up and let's just say I'm just going to pick out a name, Lord Rothschild. You're a descendant of the Rothschild family. You're a Kharazan Jew, which means you're full-blown Caucasian. You just happen to adhere to the Jewish religion because it does facilitate a mechanism and an ecosystem to make money without guilt associated with it. You are extremely wealthy. Your family has been the controllers of the universe for a really long time. You financed wars from both sides. Okay, so you wake up in the morning and you've been literally transposed. Like, I forgot that movie. It was All of Me or something where, was it Steve Martin and Lily Tomlin replaced each other's consciousness? Okay, so you're swapped out for this dude's consciousness. You now, for whatever reason, you walk out into your study and there's your financial numbers on a bunch of computers and you realize you're worth quadrillions. You realize you own most of the real estate in the world. You own countries. You own banks in China that have Chinese names, and you realize you're just covertly installed in every orifice of this planet's consciousness. Okay. On one side, you just chalk it up to, hey, look how successful and smart we've been. I don't think anybody could rob a Rothschild of that accolade. I don't think you can. They have been amazingly brilliant, and they were very fortunate in time to do what they did when they did it. All right. So you have all this control. All this wealth. You have two attitudes you can take right away. You're going to be a philanthropist and you're going to give away all your money, which means the comfort of which you live in is going to be jeopardized. Once someone finds out the deeds of your family and find out that perhaps their loved one died due to war you financed, when you start giving away all this money, people say, where do you get all this money? You're going to have to answer a lot of calls on where it came from. All right. Well, you don't want to do that then. But everything's in place already. There's an apparatus in place to guard the money from ever being taken away from you. You maybe have vaults of gold, vaults of treasure of all kinds, both human-created treasures and precious diamonds and precious stones and all these other things. Maybe you just own sheer real estate. If you just want to say, look, I'm going to turn a new leaf and all I'm going to do is hang on to this stuff. I'm not going to acquire anything else. Well, there's always this algorithm in the universe of the haves and the have-nots. If anybody knows you're a have, they're coming after you. They're going to scapegoat you for their problems. And quite frankly, you might be part of their problems. I think that very quickly, within minutes, hours, and days, you would start developing the fear structure that they have, which is that you're sort of born into a world where you could be in trouble just for who you are. And so you either beat them or you join them. But how do you beat yourself, right? Maintaining what you have would require a massive control apparatus over everything that you own. And the more that you own, and the more that you inherit as a child into adulthood, the more of an insane apparatus you're going to have to create or maintain. There's strength in numbers, right? They always say that line. Now, what if you're one family that has a bunch of money and there's another family that has a bunch of money and there's like a dozen families that have an equal amount of unbelievable, inexhaustible cash and resources? You know that it would be better for you guys to work together than to work against each other, because then it could turn into a bloodbath. Literally, you send an assassin over to kill somebody and they send an assassin over to kill you, and nobody wants to wake up or go to bed at night, with the fear they're not going to wake up in the morning. They're going to wake up in some dungeon. So they want peace and quiet for their world. And so they're going to amass numbers, and it's going to take hundreds of years to really get these families to agree on how much they own, how much you own, how much power do you have. It's tough enough within a family of four to get the family to agree on how to go out and have a good time. What place we're going to eat at, what movie we're going to see, what movie we're going to watch at home, like what ingredients go on the pizza. It's hard enough just with the incidental things of life. Imagine taking massive wealth, stockpiles and trying to agree on, everything. And who knows what the history would do to certain families of saying, hey, well, my family used to own that country and now you own it and you need to give it back to me. And so the guy's going, well, okay, well, I'll give you that country, but can you give me this one over here? Because I have some other business things might work well. Imagine trying to figure out all that. But they have. The number one clue, and I got this from David Icke, and I'm sure you got it from somebody else. But the number one clue that they're all working together is that these agendas hatch around the world overnight. All European countries, the EU will hatch an agenda, and that agenda will be hatched in the United States, and it'll be hatched in Australia. Just take a look at this whole global warming bunch of bullshit, which again has been renamed to climate change because the world's about to get really, really cold because we're about to go into the mini ice age, which is a 150-year cycle. It's going to be here in 2020. Wait till the Thames freezes right downtown London. And you tell me all about how global warming caused that to happen, right? They're saying right now that anything bad in the world, conscious decisions of human beings are all blamed on global warming. It's just crazy. But these agendas to reduce world population by making energy cost a lot of money through any excuse they can come up with are hatched globally. The leading scientists reject every bit of it. So they pay off a bunch of pseudoscientists. And, of course, an actor named Al Gore. But these organizations have been behind closed doors for a really long time, having these annual meetings to distribute their marching orders. But prior to that, they meet in private. They go in these circles around the world, all these different factional clubs around the world, making sure that that there's not going to be any resistance. For any of you who have ever watched House of Cards, and I recommend you do watch the unedited British version that came out, started in the late 80s. It's now turned into the Netflix version. You'll see how they, it's sort of the fabled way that they get support for bills and laws and that sort of thing. Now, I say fabled because it's all bullshit. They can get anything they want passed very, very easily. It used to be that you would actually vote and it'd be counted, right? But these individuals hatch these agendas based on maintaining control. That is the only motive behind anything that they ever do. But the layman is sold a bunch of catchphrases to make them feel like they really have the drop on reality. And it's not that they're incorrect. It's just what they've done is they've sort of zoomed up on a larger plan and they've zoomed into a particular area of the strategy and they feel very comfortable with what they've figured out. And I'll give you an example. There's something called corporatism. I did an episode on it. And, they'll really liken all the agendas of the world to corporate greed. And by all means, there are corporate greed people. So the minions at the bottom of the pyramid, or I'd say a little bit up from bottom, are sort of your corporate CEOs, your investment banking house CEOs. And they're never really going to be invited to the tippy top of the pyramid, right? The Parameridian stone at the top. They're not going to get there. But their next best thing is to join the Parameridian, the top of the pyramid, and do whatever they can to serve that quadrant of the control structure of the world. What they get in return is usually a short-term gain of wealth. I guess your Christian might say they're godless people. They are extremely secular. They believe that there is no accountability in the universe whatsoever. There wouldn't be any afterlife of any kind. And once you buy into that, you can become an evil son of a bitch. Because this is it. Right? Maybe that's the way it is. I don't know. I think I have evidence that it's different, but whatever. So people lock into these things that occur, right? These corporations that just rape humanity. They think, there it is. That's where all the problems are. Down from that, you'll have in America the left versus right. You'll have the conservative versus the liberals. And the analogy I always try to give people so they can understand how the world really, really works is like this. Imagine you're walking down a corridor. There's a right side of the corridor and a left side of the corridor. And there's doors every 10 feet or so at the exact same points. And all these paradigms of opposition are standing in the doorways opposite of each other. So if you're at a particular doorway and you're dealing with the political opposition, you have the red Republicans and the blue Democrats. And if you're willing to stop at that point in the hallway and say it's all Rush Limbaugh's fault, it's all Al Franken's fault, they got you. It's like a little mousetrap. You don't go any further down the corridor. If you walk to the next level up, you usually stop at corporatism. And you're like, it's all corporations. And there's really just the same faction on both sides of the fence. You no longer have a left-right polarity. Then you walk to the next one. You might come up with, like, it's bankers. And you're getting a lot warmer, as they used to play that game, right? Warmer. But then you might, at the banker level, you might just say it's Goldman Sachs. It's Fannie, the people that ran Freddie Mac, or Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, right? It's those guys. You might go up one step further and say it's the military-industrial complex. It's not that you're incorrect about the contribution of these individual factions to destroy your life and the stability of your existence, and why famine exists and why there's such a discrepancy between the rich and the poor. You're accurate in looking at both these sides of the fence. What you need to understand is each one of these doorways is equally responsible for everything, right? They're all working together. But here's the end of the visual analogy for you. The source of your problem is at the end of the corridor through those emergency doors. There's no more doors left and right. It's right down the center. And in that room, in that posh wooden den or gentleman's club lobby, are the men sitting in big giant leather chairs, just like in trading places. And they are the family members that are these people that own all of those previous paradigms that you were willing to believe were the reason for the problem. And they're simply the families that got there first. That's all that is, And what needs to be said about these families is the following. They have fought tooth and nail to be where they are. Maybe not the individuals that are actually sitting in that room, but their forefathers have. That doesn't mean you need to respect them in any major level. It doesn't mean you need to cut them any slack, but you need to understand that I think under most cases, their genome is pretty powerful, right? Their DNA is extremely versatile, dynamic, patient. And, there's an old saying that know thy enemy. And it's a multidimensional statement. It's know who they are, but you also need to know what they are, which will lead to what they are capable of. I think it's interesting that, Hollywood and television have really romanticized what a gangster looks like, or, a true gangster or a true hitman, right? The hitman are always these, lean German, in fact, there's the video game Hitman, which is this bald-headed white guy. He's always dressed in a really tight suit, or it's a John Wick. And they give away every attribute of who they are, when the people that really do the jobs in this world, not your Iceman who's like an anomaly off to the side, but even he was pretty benign looking, although I think he was physically massive, but they're little scrawny guys. They're little nobodies that can wear khaki shorts and a Hawaiian shirt and just pass as your dopey tourist. Those are the guys that are knocking everyone out in the world, not your big, tough tattoo guy. They wouldn't dare, why would you telegraph your intent by your physical appearance? None of those guys get the jobs. Okay, they're absolute nobodies who also have a jovial spirit. They can compartmentalize their task of killing people and then pop out of that compartment and be just, hey, let's go see a movie. So I just want you to understand, these people are smart. These people are really, really smart. And they're smart for two reasons. One, I think they probably genetically really harvested their neural nets extremely well. And there are crazies. I'm sure there's crazies up there too. We know they're sociopathic. We know that they're very I think, void of compassion. But, when I studied acting, I did Othello. It was one of my first acting gigs, just in class. I didn't get on stage and do a full performance or anything, but when I was studying Othello, and they taught us Iago. Iago is the villain of all villains if you're a writer. And what they teach you in writing class is that the villain never thinks that they're a villain. From their perspective, they're doing everything that is correct. They are being compassionate to their needs. And so when we say that someone's discompassionate, they're living from that reptilian R-factor brain, maybe they are, and maybe from their perspective, they're being utterly emotional about the situation. Maybe they have their frivolous reality show complaints at the dinner table based on whatever they experience, right? These crazy birthday parties that we've seen photographed from the 70s of the Rothschild parties. Yeah, I think it's in Paris or something like that, where, it is just kooky, man. If you ever want to see something that just makes you understand how utterly different their brain is from yours, go look that up. Go look up, I think, Rothschild birthday party. It's like a 74 or something like that in the 70s. But these, the women have to wear all these crazy animal heads. So you have like deer heads. I don't think there was ever a goat head. I don't think it's big enough to put on your body, but they'll taxidermy a deer head and put it on a woman with antlers and everything, right? But on the dinner tables, they had these dolls of children, and they dismantled the bodies. So they're dolls, they're plastic dolls, but they have like the heads, arms, and legs all spread out on the table. Dismembered baby bodies. A symbol of dismembered baby bodies all over the tables. So like if any of you have had a wedding and you're like, what are we going to put in the centerpiece of all the tables? Well, the Rothschilds put dismembered baby bodies. Although they're plastic, what kind of message are you trying to send there? That should give you an idea. When we say they're into satanic rituals where they sacrifice children and consume their blood, we're not joking, unfortunately. Go look at these party pics, maybe I'll overlay a couple on here. So they're up at this world that we don't really have an ability to understand. One, they have more power and money. And their whole thing about money is just power. That's all they really want. In the end, it distills up to power. I guarantee you, if buying Pez dispensers gave them power, that's all they'd ever buy. They wouldn't worry about money. Whatever gives them power to maintain what their family has handed down to them, that's what they're going to go get, and that's what they're going to maintain. Why am I lamenting on and on 30 minutes about these guys? Because I want you to understand that they're never going to allow you to vote on their future. Regardless of what their intent is, they'll never let you make a decision whether or not they get what they want. There's all this push against Donald Trump. And I'm going to defend Donald Trump from one standpoint, that I think he's not part of their system. Maybe he is. We know he's a good friends with the Clintons. Maybe he is totally sold out to these people. It doesn't appear like he has. Everything that he's saying is what's on the minds of people. And we know that leaders in the past have done this. Hitler did that same thing and said, you're all suffering from this government and it's the Jews' fault, right? All Donald Trump is saying is, look, I don't kill anybody, but we got to lock up our borders and turn on real immigration. And then we just have to make this country great by making products. He's not preaching genocide. He's not preaching killing anybody. He does want to fortify our efforts in the war theaters. But, on his first 3 days of office, he'll get that experience that Obama actually slipped up and talked about. A really good friend of mine who was a big Obama supporter until she saw how utterly two-faced the guy was. She said that she had heard a comment from Obama that said that after he said something about, you think it's going to go one way until your first 3 days in office, and you're essentially pulled into this briefing. You get 3 days of being told how much you're nothing. Now, I would imagine that Obama would have known that ahead of time, because he's into the Bilderberg group, which we're going to get into in just a second here. So I think Trump would be a problem, in that he would go into that briefing room, a guy that has been in a many briefing rooms, and he's not a trivial human being. And so if he is told that the world doesn't work the way that it's fabled to work, and I'm sure he already knows this, that he has the choice to go to the podium in front of his next press conference and attempt to tell the world live on television what just happened in this room. Now we know, most of us at MK Ultra know, that they'd kill him. He would have a heart attack. Whoever's the vice president candidate goes into place, and if that guy or girl has a problem, they're dead too. It's a horrific moment in the history of the United States where both the president and the vice president is killed, and whoever is the super PAC shill on the Senate is going to take control of this country. They'll do it. So Trump has got, if he's not part of the clique, he's got a very, very dangerous thing ahead of him, which is taking office if he were to ever win. So let's talk about where these families have gone since they gained power. Pretty much from our history goes back, we think, fairly accurately in terms of our leadership to the 1700s. In that, when I see our leadership, I'm talking about the banker families in Europe that actually control the apparatus that is the economy today. The Rothschild family, if they don't exist, that they're a Kaiser Sose, then there's been a brilliant effort to create their history, to photograph people and to draw people and to write history about them. It could be that that's how romanticized our reality is, even when you think you're a truther. But the way that the story goes is that these, was it Amstel, I think was the first. Rothschild is not their last name, of course, which means red shield, which is what they would hang out in front of their business to attract business. I believe that a lot of our last names are based on that sort of thing. My last name's Lowe, which is a German word Löwe, which means lion. So my family probably hung a sign out front that was a lion just to attract people to their businesses, right? So whatever, they changed their names. And the idea was that they dealt in precious coins. And then they realized that the precious coins not only have an inherent weight value of whatever element they're made out of, but they can also be sold as collector's items for more than they're actually worth. And eventually this whole thing manifested up where he was loaning money to monarchs in Europe, starting with the Germans out of Frankfurt, Germany, which is where I used to live. And that just kept going and going until their daddy, Grandpa Rothschild, really amassed an amazing amount of control in Europe. Then he had 5 sons. He sent each son into different countries in Europe and took over the banking systems. And then there's the famous Battle of Waterloo, which resulted in completely taking over the British economy. And you're talking about kings and queens having to suck up to this guy to get enough hard cash to pay their soldiers to do whatever they wanted to do. Not realizing that as a banker, you could finance aggression from any angle. So you could actually finance aggression from one country. Then when that country starts to out-finance and out-maneuver their opponent, you go over to the opponent with another faction and you finance your opponent against the first opponent that you created, right? So they could have orchestrated wars forever. Okay. So this builds up to the point where, again, at the turn of the 1800s, which again you have your Waterloo battle, they pretty much put the coup de grace move in on the entire economy of Europe. And the rest of the world's in the Stone Age, just so it doesn't matter. America's still trying to figure out what currency they're going to print. So you go throughout the 1800s, and you have a lot of wars in the United States, which are all based on banking cartel wars. The War of 1812 was about America getting rid of their the first Federal Reserve type bank, and they fought for less than a year. And America said, okay, we don't really have an army to fight you anymore. We did the Revolutionary War for nearly 30 years. We're sort of tapped right now, so we'll turn your bank back on. Andrew Jackson gets in there in the 1800s, or 1830s, and they try to kill him, and he manages to slip by. But soon after that, they win the battle again. Then Lincoln comes in and tries to wipe him out. They shoot him in the head. So this thing's going on and on and on. Of course, we all know about the 16th Amendment, signed in 1913. Well, they have been planning, and this is just the patience of these people, man, planning for 100 years plus, probably using techniques that are over a millennia old, to take over the United States of America by all financial means necessary. And that was the charter statement, as reported in history, of the Skull and Bones organization, which hid itself inside Yale University, which still exists to this day, right? John Kerry's a skull and bones. George Herbert Walker Bush is skull and bones. George Bush is skull and bones. I believe all the Bush sons are probably skull and bones. Taft was a skull and bones. All the founding members of the CIA were skull and bones. I mean, this is a very serious organization, right? They continue this sort of shadow government and infiltration of America, and very successfully so. 1913, they turn over the 16th Amendment, which turns into us making all of our money by borrowing it from them, which is just insane, right? They have nothing to back their money at all. It's all fiat. It's taken off the gold standard, whether we know it or not. And they start World War I so that America will borrow against the war. But we're xenophobic. We stay out of it until 1917. Piss them off hardcore. So Franz Ferdinand being bumped off was a scheme to get America into a war. So they end up creating the 1920s to rape everybody in the United States who was rich of all their money, which ends in the 29 crash, which ends in the formation of the Security and Exchange Commission, which essentially is a formalized body to make sure that peasants can't invest in what rich people invest in. It's illegal. Then the Depression was all about confiscating all the gold and raping the middle class. So they just raped the elite of America from all their money, and now they're going to rape the middle class through this 15-year depression. And it didn't end until the end of World War II. But it ends after we borrow money to fight Hitler for roughly 4.5 years, right? We've been borrowing to build up our military up to that point, before that too, right? Again, war economy is a good economy, remember? Okay. World War II is over. You have the formation of the State of Israel, which, and there's a lot of stories about that being, a conspiracy unto itself. I think that's very legitimate, and it's too deep to go into on this episode. But by 1954, in the Bilderberg Hotel of the Netherlands, you have a meeting that occurs. And they affectionately name the meeting after the hotel, which is the Bilderbergs, the Bilderberg Hotel. This meeting brought together for the very first time the survivors of all these cabals, right? And it was essentially in Europe, inviting the elite families of Europe to get together. I forgot the name of the dude who actually pulled it all together. It's sort of irrelevant. And this is where it gets funny and gets interesting. The press in all European first world countries denied that the Bilderberg group existed from 1954 to 2004, which is 50 years. For 50 years, if anyone ever came out and said that this organization existed, they were lambasted in the press as being a crazy conspiracy theorist. In 2004, the CEO of the Bilderberg Group oddly took an interview, a videotaped interview. And in this interview, he admits the following. He says, and he's really dry human being, all right? Again, he's not the CEO because he runs the world. He's the CEO because he runs this organization and organizes the events, right? Organizes, and I'll tell you how this all works in just a second. But he says, we're not a cabal that runs the world. He goes, we're a headhunting agency. Technically speaking, he did not lie. But what the hell did he mean by saying they're a headhunting agency? I watched the words come out of his mouth, right? What the Bilderbergs do is they're an agency that serves this ruling class. What they do is they find candidates that will become the chancellors, the prime ministers, and the presidents in all the countries that matter. And I'll give you an example. If you had a South American country that didn't matter in, say, 1990, but for whatever reason, their resources shifted, we found a bunch of uranium in their backyard, they could grow cocaine really, really well, and they started becoming a supplier to the ruling class and part of the apparatus of control, then the agenda is pointed at them. And whoever's in office will get thrown out of office. And they try to do it by the cheapest means necessary. So what they'll end up doing is try to finance someone from their headhunting agency, right? They'll go down, they'll find candidates or find people that can speak the language and pass for an indigenous leader somewhere else in the world. And they'll vet them, and they'll ask them questions about how they believe the world should work and whether or not they buy into these cabal algorithms of ruling the planet. And as long as they answer all the questions properly, they are given the job. And they're given the job as a result of a Bilderberg meeting interview. Then the process takes probably a couple of years to actually push the person down there, giving them all the credentials if they're not from there. But if they're from there, they get financed up, so they have a great campaign. They get all this crazy, beautiful campaign management from these groups. And they'll try to do it through peaceful means to replace the leadership. If there's any problems in doing that peacefully, then they will finance a militia of resistance. Pretty much out of, I think, most of the people that live there who are disenfranchised with the leadership, and there's always a group that's disenfranchised with the leadership, no matter what. If nothing else, they can find people who are racist, or they can find people that are poor, find people that have had a bad couple of years, and they can simply say, look, we think, we're the rich people of the world, we think that you're probably suffering from that leadership, aren't you? Shouldn't your life be better than it is right now? And they're like, fuck yeah. It's okay. What if we give you money for guns? We even supply you the guns. We supply you everything you need. On this particular day, you go for whatever White House you have, wherever the dude lives, and you throw him out, and then we'll have free elections. That's the story. And they're willing to do it. And they go up and they do it. And of course, the election that's coming has all been pre-planned. And then boom, the Bilderberg elected official within the Bilderberg construct, right? The interview process of you got the job, that shill goes in there, takes it over. But because surveillance is so insane right now, it doesn't matter who you are. If they can't find dirt on you, they'll make dirt on you. But a lot of politicians always have dirt on them, right? And I'll give you another example of where I think it becomes evident that the leadership doesn't really lead anything, you know. Now, you don't have to look further than most countries and first world countries to realize that no one's really on the side of the countries that they're representing, like Merkel, you know, the chancellor, I guess, of Germany, who is letting in all this immigration, you know. Vicente Fox, who was the president of Mexico, I don't know if he's still, I think he's out of the game by now, but he presides over a country with the greatest discrepancy between the rich and the poor. It's a country that is so mismanaged that we have a bunch of people trying to cross the border, again, leaving their homeland to be in another person's backyard. Now, again, it takes an amazing amount of discontent in your own native land to leave your country and go to another country. It must be horrific for the consciousness, right? But instead of actually doing something for his own country, he never did. There's a lot of drug cartels down there that probably bump him off. But to not try is crazy, in my opinion, if you're just a good human being. Or at least call it out. At least even resign and say, look, I did my 4 years or whatever. The guy gets down there, and after he gets out, he just moves to the United States and says, here's what's wrong with my country, ba, 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 ba. And I'll go into hiding, but at least the truth will come out, you know. In Brazil, you had the leader of Brazil, and I forgot his name, but he was the leader that said, I'm going to mine all the oil out of the offshore huge stash we've got under the ocean. It's bigger than Saudi Arabia, and I'm going to use the profits from selling oil to finance the utter reconstruction of Brazil, to the point we'll be one of the most amazing Dubais on planet Earth. Very quickly after he made that announcement, he started having problems, and he was thrown out of office, and a IMF executive shill, female, was put in there in his place. And now the place is in utter turmoil. Brazil has had, you know, runs on food, like they're broke, but they're not broke. They're presiding over, you know, one of the biggest oil wells, oil reserves in the world. But they don't live like they are. Again, as my source from British Petroleum said, Scotland. We got our Scotland viewers. Scotland owns the shore, you know, the land outside of their part of the island of Great Britain. And they have, from what I've been told, the biggest reserve in the world. bigger than Alaska, bigger than Brazil, and way bigger than Saudi Arabia. Completely and utterly untapped. And what that means is you punch a hole in the ground and you don't need a pump. It just comes blasting out. 6-foot wide pipes. Imagine that. And it's just the oil comes blasting out of the ground so intensely, you have to actually develop technology so you don't have a problem regulating it coming out of the pipe. It's so violent and so powerful. But how much do you pay for gas in Scotland? I'm going to say you pay 3 to 4 times what we pay in the United States of America, and we don't have a reserve like that. We have Alaska if we could get the thing opened up. This stuff can be done very eco-friendly. You know, again, oil is not what we want to be on this show. I'm just saying if we're all going to suck the tit of petrol and oil, then these are some of the alternatives we could open up to reduce the cost of it while we get ourselves over to something better. But back to the Bilderbergs. Now, there's a bit of a romanticized misnomer about what exactly happens on that 1 week of this meeting. And it usually happens in spring. And what they do, if you're totally new to this, they reserve a hotel in the world. And what they do is every time there's a presidential election in America, they have it in America. It's this new thing. But they've done it in Canada, Istanbul, every place on planet Earth. This hotel is sequestered. And if you have a reservation, here's what's weird about it. Let's say that you and your family are going to stay in Istanbul, and you happen to accidentally reserve a room in the hotel that's going to be the room where the Bilderbergs are happening. Because they hide the date of when they actually show up to this, the hotels, I think either maybe out of just sheer lack of notice to themselves, they don't know they're going to be picked, I think, in some cases. So they don't black out the dates. So you and your family are in Istanbul. They will come get your shit and throw you out of your room with no apologies. You don't get, maybe you get your money back, maybe, but you're stuck in Istanbul without reservations, without a place to stay. They don't go find you other rooms. They simply kick your ass out. The hotel is absolutely under siege by the top security that country can provide. And you don't get picked if you can't provide the security. But I mean, you're talking about the elite of the elite within that country. And of course, they're all, abiding soldiers that will simply do what they're told, never ask a question, while up in the hotel their futures are being decided, in most cases destroyed. But they protect their own destruction. How crazy is that, right? As far as they've been able to tell, through all my reading and all the results and all of the leaked notes, which we don't know if there's a real or not, the Bilderberg meeting happens to preside and precursor a bunch of change in the world. The agendas that happen in the following 2 weeks are usually fairly profound. The 2008 subprime loan scandal was essentially hatched the year before, in 2007. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac went under a week after the Bilderberg meeting in 2007, I believe. It took about a year to incubate the whole thing up. That's when Jim Cramer came out, the investment crazy guy on the Fox, came out and said, the whole world's going to end. He said that in December of 2007. And it took a year before what he said actually came true. But what it is a group of the most elite people that are willing to show up on camera. Because now the meetings are essentially besieged by independent press people. People with these 5,000 power zoom lenses start taking photographs of everybody who shows up. And there's a great book called The Bilderberg Group that's published by an author named Daniel Estelin, who was he's an odd character. I've actually had some email correspondence with him because I'm in Hollywood. He wanted me to try to find him a movie deal to make him a superhero. It's the weirdest thing on earth. I'm trying to talk to him about his next book, about what he's doing, and he was like, well, I'm looking for a film deal. I want to, thinking about maybe a fictional piece where I'm a superhero. And it's just like, what are you talking about? I'm not talking about Marvel, but I'm talking about some like James Bond type character. And I was thinking, wow, your priorities are really in place, dude. And his follow-up book was all about the KLA drug trafficking through with Slobodan Milosevic's area, right? But this group comes together, and you do have some massively powerful people. The King and Queen of Norway have shown up. David Rockefeller used to show up. I don't know if he shows up anymore now that he's 100 years old. Bona fide, Henry Kissinger shows up. But the bona fide, certified proxies to the Rothschild Empire show up. I don't believe anyone's ever videotaped or taken a photograph of an actual Rothschild at these things, but their proxies show up. The CEOs and editors of most of the giant rags here in America and Europe show up. Washington Post CEO will show up. And, of course, then they go back and they abide by releasing anything that covers up the event or pushes through the propaganda that needs to happen, right? Again, they're being invited to the club. Is essentially how it works. And I think Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, used governor taxpayer dollars to fly to Istanbul to have his meeting with the Bilderbergs. And again, these guys are nobodies compared to the real power structure of the world. Rick Perry's agenda, he was an ex-lobbyist for pharmaceutical companies. He's one of the first governors to try to put mandatory vaccinations on his people. And because, Texas has this weird pride, they never really pay attention to what they're doing. They're just like, well, everything's bigger in Texas, and Texas is this and that and this and that. And it's like, whatever my leadership says, let's do it. They've had some great governors who are real honest-to-goodness governors. There's their female governor. I forgot her name. She was I think a fairly legit governor who really kept the well-being of Texas in place, which is why they had to get rid of her and put Perry in. But these groups come together, and I think that what's happening is a lot of folks think that they're being interviewed about their opinions, and their whole excuse is that nothing is recorded or transcribed in the meetings, and their opinion, their overt excuse for this is to say, if we record what everybody says and the world understands what everyone says later on, that they won't be candid with us. They won't really tell us the truth. And so we keep this a very private meeting such that everyone can say what they need to say, be as frank as possible, and no harm, no foul. Now, we all know how it really works in the world. You would never go in front of a group of your peers or a group of your superiors in your own mind and disagree with them. You're just not invited to do that. And you wouldn't do that because then you become a resistance in the world. And this is all about being in part of this elite club. And they don't want to be not invited to the next round. And so you're not going to really go in and be, I think, cantankerous and adversarial to their agendas. You're going to go there, shut up, and listen. But the Bilderberg meeting is where they hand out what they've been working on for the previous year. So every single day, 365, or I guess you could knock out 5 days for the meeting itself. So for 360 days, prior to the Bilderberg meeting being held, wherever it's held, the real shadow government of the world, that again would never let Joe the plumber vote on their destiny, have figured out what's going to occur. And it's part of a massive plan. We don't know how many years out that they actually plan, but I would wager they're out 100 years at least. But they essentially divvy out their notes. And because these big, powerful people do show up, like Kissinger and the proxies and the king and queens and all these other guys, they are most likely having meetings on their end as well, where they are debating a few things or at least becoming informed. What if Kissinger is not in part of this 360-day thing? And I think he's out of the game now, but let's just say he was still in the game. Or for the years that he was in the game, when he didn't weigh 350 pounds, he would have to be told what's going to happen, and then maybe he needs to ask a few questions. Well, okay, does that mean this? Does that mean this? What do how does this work in? Oh, I get it. He's not there to resist necessarily. I'm sure they're going to pick his brain for improving their plan, but in the end, it's just an informational dump into these people's minds and to kick off the agenda. And to create this sense of elitism that you're a part of once you show up. Okay, I think you feel me. The interesting thing is that the secret meeting is, again, for 50 years they said it didn't exist. While they said it didn't exist, you have some interesting correlations between who became the president of the United States and the prime minister of England. At least we know. Bill Clinton, who was an absolute nobody to the rest of the world, showed up before he became president. Tony Blair showed up before he became president. The guy before Tony Blair showed up as well, and his name just instantly escaped my memory now that I thought about it. John Major. He went in beforehand. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama went on the same day. And that's when they put all the press on planes and said, you're going to be with Obama and you're going to be with Hillary, and you guys are going to fly in a jet and you can ask them a bunch of questions. And they put all the press on the jet, closed the door, started taxiing it down the runway and said, oh, by the way, Hillary's sick and Obama is not here. And later, the outward press is that they had a meeting together, right? They're the opposition within the Democratic Party, and they had a meeting together. And essentially what happened was that Hillary wasn't playing very well to the press, to the voting caucuses. And so they said, well, this Barack Obama guy really has the racial thing going here. So we're going to play the race card with him, and he's going to become president. He worked really hard and you didn't. So Hillary, you're going to get Secretary of State for a little while and prove yourself to us. And then you're going to get a big, big chance in 2016. And here we are. Mitt Romney never tried to become president, to try to take out Obama in his second term. Never even tried. His campaign was the driest thing you've ever seen in your life, And again, the last 4 elections of the President of the United States have been 51-49 splits. An astronomically impossible odd to happen 4 times out of 350 million people, of the subset of those people that believe that voting actually counts. Okay, so the Bilderberg group not only hatches the agendas for the entire planet, but they also find our leaders, which is what that CEO interview in 2004 was all about. We are a headhunting agency. They headhunt the leaders that will capitulate to their overall agenda. So then they have this thing where you have a campaign, and the citizens of any country believe that the race is on. And because the race of how they tally votes and how they run the electoral in the United States of America are so kind of mysterious to people, right? How many counties are there in the United States of America? I mean, of all 50 states, there's too many for any human being to really conceive of. And the electoral states are on top of those counties in weird ways. They use mass media to make you believe that they have picked the very best candidates, right? These career politicians. So the Tea Party came out of nowhere in America as a sort of an anti-IRS organization where they had essentially identified what Aaron Rizzo figured out in Freedom to Fascism, his documentary before he died of stomach cancer, that the taxes against wages, the way that they're done in the United States of America, is actually illegal, which is that we're all different tax brackets, different tax percentages. The only way you can do it in America legally is to have what's called a portion tax, which is we're all on a flat rate. But flat rate would then make sure that the 1% was getting also flat rated. And that can't happen in this country, right? So they existed for a few months, and then, of course, they sent Sarah Palin down, a very unpopular person in the United States in most circles, and had her she just showed up to one of their gatherings and jumped up on the mic, and that was the end of the Tea Party. They infiltrated that group and discredited them in 2 seconds with her presence, right? So they're out of the game. Because America is so strung out on sports, we know what it's like to have 2 parties against each other, and we buy into that paradigm because no matter how the playoffs go, there's only 2 teams at the very end of any championship. And that's essentially how they play it in the United States of America. And what they do is they load up these presidential debates with a bunch of people that aren't going to be president, that have no chance of being president, right? They don't look good. They don't sound good. They're so disengaged, it's crazy. There's conspiracies on 95% of them, so they get knocked out just because they slept with their maid and had an illegitimate child. Things that may or may not matter running the country. But they make sure that there are candidates that will never get elected and candidates that will. And that's how, when it comes down to voting day, when they throw the vote, you'll believe it. They also tell you for months and months ahead of time what the odds are of who's going to win, which, again, in a sports metaphor, which everyone's strung out on in this country, it all makes sense. Well, they said that guy was going to win. Now, throwing the vote is an extremely complex process that they do here in the United States of America. It was essentially put together that no matter how many paper votes we used to have, the paper votes disappear out of the voting booths and get sent to some centralized warehouse where they're counted. Now, to my knowledge, the only count that was ever recounted were the hanging chads of the President George Bush in 2000. We know that 9/11 was coming, and they knew 9/11 was coming because they had all the Patriot Act stuff written ahead of time, and they had their war plan to go after 7 countries in Eurasia all planned out. This was all, we needed George Bush in place. Of course, he's running against Al Gore at the time, right? Now, I can't even imagine what would have happened if Al Gore ever won. But they needed sort of this fake cowboy, right? George Bush, who was raised in Connecticut, who doesn't have a Texas accent to save his soul, who's scared of horses, becomes this cowboy president of ours. It's like Henry Kissinger's fake German accent. A lot of people who've met this guy will say they've had total conversations with him with no accent, and all of a sudden when the press comes around to say, Mr. Kissinger, are you ready for your interview? Oh, yes, I'm ready for my interview. I have this German accent all of a sudden. Really bizarre, man. But we've seen George Bush do it, so don't think it's crazy that he does it. The smarter you are, the more you can pull off these things, right? And Kissinger is no dummy, all right? So the votes go off, and they get essentially ignored. Whatever you voted for in those old booths with paper ballots, you'll never see them again. They simply get tallied up in a computer at some centralized source, which all the mass media pull from, and it's whatever is believable is what you'll see. And that's back in the paper days, right? But now we have electronic voting booth systems, which is essentially the coup de grace, last move of making sure that no American ever has a chance of swaying the vote. And we have also something called exit polls. But the voting booth company, I believe Diebold, had a CEO that had a conviction of voter fraud on his record. I believe the way that the story goes is that 9 of the chief engineers that wrote the software for these machines, which should take about a fucking day to do, right? Relatively speaking. They also were convicted felons of voter fraud. So all these people that are experts in voter fraud founded this company, Diebold. It's just, regurgitating some stuff that books have written that haven't been pulled off the shelf, right? I believe Jeb Bush and one of the senators down in Florida also bought a voting booth company. And I think Jeb was winning in his primaries, but not by much. And the senator who went in on it, halvesies, was losing by over 2 points. I think it was deep 20% he was below. Both these men get reelected after these machines were deployed. So a governor, as a matter of conflict of interest, buys a voting booth machine company, buys a share in it, and then wins by the distribution of these machines. One of their engineers said in a public kind of town hall meeting that he participated in the throwing of votes. Now, if you think that that's bullshit, remember, if you've been paying attention, at the end of every single presidential election in the United States of America, there is a ton of people around the United States of America who have been caught in voting fraud activities. Whether the machines, a lot of times is the machines were never counted. We have people that vote 4 or 5 times. We have illegal immigrants that are bussed around. They don't know what they're doing, but they've been bussed around to vote on 10 dead people's social security numbers. Every single possible means to throw a vote is done, from the voting booths to the voting booths machines that are counted to the ones that aren't counted. And again, they're all wirelessly connected at the voting booth locations. And you can take your cell phone next time you vote and have it search for the wireless networks at wherever you're voting. You can just drive around town and you'll see the networks of those machines. So the only thing that between throwing the vote and not throwing the vote is someone having the password to the network. And then just literally, you just drive up with the laptop. And towards the end of the day, before you might be the guys and girls that are picking up the machines. Someone runs the program. It's all automated, right? We want this sector to have this result because that's believable. So they log in. It could be completely automatic. You just log in. Could be even in the vehicles, okay? Just to give you an example, it could be automated in the vehicles they're using to pick up the voting booths. There's a little bit in every single machine. Have you been changed? And the bit's 0 when they show up, and it's just constantly broadcasting wherever they go. Boom, this ID of this machine is supposed to have these votes. Or we're going to suck in all the votes, and we're just going to change them. Out of 50 people that voted in this particular machine, we need to sway it this way, that way. And because you and I, in the United States of America, have no means of ever getting that little ribbon of paper that's supposedly tracking what we're doing, it's just flushed. No one ever gets a chance to contest the votes. There's never any recount because it's out of national pride that we would never catch ourselves throwing a vote, right? What's funny is any high school teachers teaching probability and statistics in school ever just ran the likelihood of 4 presidential elections being neck and neck 51-49%, they would immediately be able to prove to their students that this is impossible. But they never do, right? They don't even suspect it's a problem. So as I said, we're going to go down from the top to the bottom. And I know that some people are going to say, well, you can't prove anything that you say, so this is all bullshit. All right. Go and explain to me 4 presidential elections in a row at 51-49%, and spare me your bullshit about how divided we were as a country, right? Exit polls before the internet were all fudged. Whatever needed to coincide with the story was all that was ever said. And the exit polls, it could be like, okay, we're going to ask everybody who's part of this exit poll exhibition, and we can have crisis actors that basically go in and vote, and they have this little red lapel clip, and it's like, okay, you ask all the red lapel people what they voted for, and it's honestly this poll that they're getting out of these people who've already been told how to respond. But now the internet's actually had a few interesting things at the presidential elections, especially in these swing states, which I'm going to get into in a second here, where the exit polls totally contradicted what actually occurred. The divide wasn't really there. And if any of you have ever done poll statistics, and I've programmed polls several times at companies where we're trying to rate video games and stuff, what's amazing is a sample of 1,000 people unbelievably matches the sample of 1,000,000 people. The percentages fluctuate 5% tops. So what do we have in America now? We have thrown votes, but we have to put a cover story on the whole thing so everybody believes it. And that's where you get the swing state. Every single presidential election, they tell you that there's a swing state. Sometimes it's Florida, sometimes it's Iowa, sometimes it's New Hampshire. They pick it. Whatever is believable. The more rural and inaccessible, the better. And it goes all the way up to that swing state. And they'll even tell you that California is completely decided, or one of the biggest electoral colleges, or the biggest one in the United States of America. But they'll tell you how it's all been decided. And what's crazy about it is if you live in California, you'll know that Northern California votes completely different than Southern California. Completely different. Right? You get your real socialist, kind of liberal Bernie Sanders, I want the government to pay for everything. And you have a lot of rich people in Southern California that are the 1%ers that want the Republican to win. And believe me, there's more people in Southern California than there are in Northern California. By probably an order of magnitude of 3 to 1. So when you walk in that booth next time in the United States of America, or wherever you are, understand that you're engaging in a ceremony that has no meaning. So am I saying don't vote? Well, I think that the only thing you're really voting on is your local ballots, your local measures, your local props. I believe that your vote probably is pretty much counted because I don't think they give the apparatus to the lower echelon. So if you want to keep taxes out of your backyard, out of your paychecks, you need to vote down every single ballot that is an increase in taxes, every proposition that's an increase in taxes, because it's all bullshit. Whatever they're telling you is not what it's going to do in most cases. And it doesn't matter if you really vote for something that changes the world, because as we've seen in California, they simply don't follow it. We voted in the state of California 15 years ago to not fund the health care of immigrants, of illegal immigrants. Well, once we did that, they just ignored it. They just said, fuck you, you voted for it, we're not going to honor your vote. And nobody pulled their head out of their ass as a result of seeing that happen. But that's what happened. Where there's a controversy that they can bubble up to make you not look at their other things, like we had Prop 8 here, which was going to keep, I believe it even passed, which was we're going to try to keep gay couples from marrying each other. Super duper financed by the Mormons. It was just there it was an insane thing to vote on in the first place. These people should be able to do whatever the hell they want with their lives. While we're voting out, I have no idea. It should just be literally a civil rights executive order from the top down to say, yes, of course, you can marry each other. What business of it is ours that you can marry each other and then pay more taxes? But at least you can pass down your inheritance to each other, right? And you can get health care and a bunch of other benefits from being a married couple. But your vote doesn't matter. And until we fix this world, until we expose this huge cabal from the top down, until we remove their power structure by removing the amount of money that they are able to get their hands on to gain power, your vote will never matter. And again, it just is as simple as the following phrase: the richest people of the world do not allow the peasants of the world to determine their future. They never have, and they never will. And now they have a complete death grip on this country, on this world, because of things like 9/11 and all these fake terrorist attacks that they do around the world, right? You know, I still have to hear people tell me how ISIS beheaded Christian children, beheaded people all over Eurasia, when we have videos of them filming this in a movie studio, right? Your fake jihadist DJ from London, who's never been exposed. He's never taken his hood off, right? He's so proud of what he's doing, he's got to hide his face. Oh, really? Yeah, that's how heroes are born, right? They keep their hoods on. Hitler kept his hood on the whole time, right? No, they show their faces because they're so arrogant. If they really believe in what they're doing, they don't hide. But because these are agents that are hired to create weird distractions and huge global policies to hate one faction over the other, they hide themselves. I still don't know what I'm going to call this episode, but it's going to have something to do with like why your vote doesn't count or something like that. I'll have to figure out a clever name for this whole thing. But that's the scoop. And that's one reason why we have to change this planet. It's gonna start from us waking up. And now you've got a little more stuff to go and research. So, again, if you made it this far, thanks for listening. If you haven't been already, go to mkultraradio.com for the whole feed. Get it however you like it, video, audio, whatever you like. We didn't get a chance to record this week. Kyle was having some car issues, so we weren't able to physically get together. But we'll get back on it. Hopefully Deep Thoughts are keeping you guys nicely entertained in the meantime. Got a lot of great subjects I'm studying like crazy. So I'll be throwing out new episodes based on your suggestions here real soon. But again, take care of yourself and somebody else. Learn the rules that rule you, and I will see you in the next episode of Deep Thoughts. Over and out.